In this video, I'm going to be comparing the Pet Sematary franchise to the Mummy franchise when it comes to the highest score for each franchise. In the case of Pet Sematary, you got 3 movies. None of them are fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. The highest score is only 57% for the 2019 movie. Admittedly, that is almost fresh. In the case of Mummy, the 1932 black and white movie, the first one of these to come out, has the highest score of 89%. And then we look at lowest score with Pet Sematary, the prequel Bloodlines that came out on Paramount Plus, also showed at film festivals, only has a 24%. In the case of Mummy, the third film, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, which is follow-up to Mummy 1999 as well as Mummy Returns, only has a 13%. Pet Sematary wins here. Then we look at average score with Mummy of an average of 45, Pet Sematary an average of 42. Mummy wins here. Then we look at gap between lowest and highest score. You got a gap of 31 in the case of Pet Sematary, whereas of Mummy you have a gap of 72. So Pet Sematary wins here, meaning that the franchises are tied heading into the final round. So this will be determined based on my personal opinion. And this one's actually easy for me. I would definitely say I prefer the Mummy franchise. Part of that is because I haven't actually watched any of the Pet Sematary movies. I've seen all these Mummy movies except for the 2017 film. That one doesn't interest me because it looks bad. I inherently like Mummy more than Pet Sematary. When it comes to the Mummy franchise, you think about it, there's certainly horror in here, no doubt about that, but it's also not a super dark, violent, gory kind of horror. It's not the same as Nightmare on Elm Street or Scream. It's not that kind of thing. I mean, you look at Mummy 1999, Mummy Returns, even Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, they have a similar energy to Indiana Jones. There's that adventure in there, but also, of course, more actual fantasy elements than Indiana Jones because of Egyptian mythology in the first 2 movies, and then Chinese mythology in Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, and you have some horror mixed in there as well. I saw the 1932 movie for the first time when I started going to SMSU, whereas have seen the I saw the Mummy films from the late 90s, early 2000s before that point. I first saw them years and years ago. I really enjoy the 1999 film as well as its sequel. I mean, when it comes to Mummy Returns, yeah, I will say that the CGI for Scorpion King hasn't necessarily aged that well, and the fact that suddenly Rick O'Connell is a magi and you learn that Evie is actually a reincarnation of this princess from ancient Egyptian times. Something that I'm not as big a fan of because it's like, really, does everybody need to be connected? Does everybody need to tie to the past somehow? You get that feeling here because in the first movie there wasn't any kind of hinting at all that these 2 people were that important, and then suddenly they're a lot more important in the second film. But I still think Mummy Returns is a lot of fun. It still captures the right energy. I would say you still have Evie and Rick being fun characters that get in on the action. When it comes to Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, I think that this one is definitely weaker than the first 2 movies for sure. The biggest reason why is because right at the beginning you learn that, oh, Rick and Evie are not in the action anymore. They're retired now. They're living in this big house. They're not going on adventures anymore. And considering the age that Brendan Fraser was at when this movie came out, he wasn't at all old. He was still a younger guy. It's very weird to suddenly have Rick and Evie be retired and not go on adventures anymore. It's like, no, that's not what I want to see from one of these movies. In fact, when you think about how Rick and Evie look in the movie, it's like, really? You're acting like they're getting up there in they're getting up there in age. That's what you're presenting here. That, oh, these characters are getting older, so they are not in on the action like they were before. At first, they're not joining adventures, and then they do get on and they do join the ride. They join this group again to go on an adventure. It's just very weird to suddenly have them not be as fun as they were before. It also feels jarring to suddenly just switch from Egyptian mythology to Chinese mythology and have almost all new characters. Only a few characters in the first two movies actually come back. There's still action in here that's fun. There's still visuals, I think, are good. There's still moments of humor that work. I mean, this is a movie that I think is enjoyable enough, but it's definitely not as good as the 1999 film or Mummy Returns. When it comes to the 1932 classic, it's certainly a slower paced movie when compared to those other Mummy films. It's not as much of a fun adventure film. It doesn't have that Indiana Jones esque energy to it. Part of that's because it came out a long time ago, and it's also in black and white. It's a different way of telling this story that's more about building up to our good guys trying to defeat the mummy. And also, what the movie does with Arnett Bay is quite different from the late 90s, early 2000s mummy films. I find almost all of these movies quite enjoyable. Pet Cemetery, I think there's an interesting idea here for sure. Stephen King is a really well known writer. There's no denying that. But in this case, I would definitely say that I prefer the Mummy franchise. I'll wrap things up for now.